Welcome to, as was said, the third roundtable for the Clean Pacific project. We've got two sessions that you have the pleasure of me, or not so much the pleasure, where we're going to look at issues related to waste and clean and circular economy. These are really important sessions, and I guess the beauty of this being a virtual conversation is that we've brought a lot of speakers, thanks to Brad and the team, from around the world who are dealing with similar issues as you guys in relation to waste management, circular economy, carbon, and the environment. So the goal is for you all to speak as much as possible so that we can capture your thinking and your views and what you'd like to see over the next 2 years to meet the 2025 targets. I gather there's 162 of them, which is quite a lot. So there's a lot of work to be done, people. So the goal is that we have a good conversation at the end with the roundtables and capture as much as what you would like to see in the outcome statement tomorrow. So this is your chance to find out from people around how public-private partnerships can work with innovation, and we always need money and we need commitment to actually make a difference and achieve this clean Pacific that you're all working to. So without further ado, we actually have a keynote speaker who's going to kick off the session. So that is Professor Alan Broadfoot from Newcastle University. He's the executive director there. He's going to talk about technical innovation of public-private partnerships in relation to circular economy and resource recovery. A bit about Alan. He's the executive director of the Newcastle Institute for Energy and Resources at the Newcastle University, a position he's held since 2010. At the uni, Alan leads an ambitious agenda linking industry and academia for transformational research in energy, resources, food and water. He holds a Doctor of Philosophy, Master of Engineering and Bachelor of Electrical Engineering from the Uni of Newcastle, an electrical engineer in various roles from 1985. Alan joined electrical design and manufacturing company AMP Control in 1991 and held senior management positions, including the managing director of CEO from 2005 to 2010. He's also a fellow of the Institute of Engineers Australia and was chair of the Australian Institute Group Hunter Manufacturing Council from 2004 to 2009. He is a graduate of Australian Institute of Company Directors, a fellow of the Royal Society of New South Wales, chair of the New South Wales Energy and Resource Knowledge Hub, and board member of TUNRA and the CRC Care. He's very qualified to talk to us today on this topic. Welcome, Alan.
Rawford, the Executive Director of the Newcastle Institute for Energy and Resources at the University of Newcastle. I've been asked today to just start the conversation about where we can leverage technology. In my role, I had the opportunity to be on the New South Wales Government Innovation and Productivity Council. One of the things we're looking at is with waste and resource recovery. Out of this, we identified a new emerging sector called the environmental goods and services. And here, in this slide, we give you an example of where this activity was taking place. It shows you the sales growth associated with prior to COVID. It also shows you the job opportunities associated and where the relative growth has been taking place. The point of this is that through innovation in the solutions, the technologies we're deploying, we're creating opportunities for job growth and sustainability that provide long-term solutions. Through our direct involvement with government and industry in waste and pollution management, what we've identified some clear benefits. One of it returns to the bottom line of the industry involved. Elimination of waste improves competitiveness, productivity and sustainability. It's about resource recovery and putting it back into the supply chain. It's about aligning themselves to what the government priorities are for the benefit of everyone, including the community. The other one, it led to high quality research outputs with involvement with industry. Industry played a key part in identifying the problem and leading the research. It's very much about outcome focus and being collaborative research between the organisations. This improved commercialisation output and the rapid translation and deployment of the technology to the benefit of the various stakeholders. It's also led to a creation of new industry. Again, it's about creating of knowledge and creating the skills to create that enterprise that can actually lead to future sustainable growth. Now, on the right-hand side here in the slide, you can actually see some other observations of improvements. Some are straightforward. The focus on decarbonisation, increased efficient use of resources, less waste to landfill, protecting human and environmental health. There's many reasons why we need to focus it, and there's a benefit of deploying it and being involved with industry engagement in having a common path between government and industry and research to be able to deliver these solutions for the benefit of all. Working at our research institute, I always say that you can actually look at our laboratories and see which direction we're looking at and where industry and government are focusing their priorities. At the moment, our priority initiatives are advancing regional initiatives in the circular economy. Again, this is about translation. There's a lot of focus on large capital cities, but what we're trying to do is take this knowledge and apply it to the regions. And it's very much the challenge, a common challenge between an island in the Pacific or a community in the desert of how do we manage our waste. The other one is emission-free resource recovery of solid waste. We're developing technologies in government and industry through co-funded projects to demonstrate how we can reduce energy, strategical materials such as chemicals through novel conversion technologies. We're also delivering our next generation resources roadmap. What we're looking at here is a next generation of research for race to resources, the environmental goods and services sector that we see is emerging, and more advanced concepts of circular economy. It's also very much about establishing circular economy precincts where industries work together with their emissions reduction. It's about creating jobs and having supply chains within the precinct to support each other. And then more recently, we've had a major focus on hydrogen production and how we can integrate that into existing processes to eliminate some of the emissions and also to improve the productivity of the production processes. These common goals or initiatives between government, industry and research has led to a significant activity level of development of new technologies and optimization of processes. I mean, this slide is very busy and it gives you many examples of where we're working together. It's just a sample of ideas or give you an indication of what new technologies are being developed. It's still very much about supply chain optimization, the focus on waste reduction. It's development of new products and services that are sustainable, looking at bioplastics and molecular biology. It's also very much about resource recovery and circular economy. There's significant gains being made here, whether it be looking at dewatering systems. It's about options for improved waste management in construction and demolition. Very major focus on recycling measures in the Australian economy, and also about the improved material sorting and reprocessing. It's significant, the research. They're technologies that wouldn't come from simply a tender from a government. It's about having the flexibility to actually improve the process and contribute to that competitiveness of the industries that are seeking to support this new emerging sector. This is a theme that I've promoted before of the core functions that embed into the collaboration we actually have with SPRAP. But it's translatable into this work we're looking at with waste and pollution management. It's about applied research. It's important to be aligned to industry and community needs and making sure that it is relevant. It's also about knowledge translation, creating regional nodes, having a focus on training and the student experience of working with these new sectors. It's about the creation of innovation. It's about going beyond the R&D and looking at the deployment of the technology. It's about product advancement. And more importantly, it's about the partnerships and the programs and the community engagement to make sure everyone understands what the contributing factors are and how it will benefit those communities. Obviously, it's impossible for me to go through each one of those activities that we're currently undertaking. I thought it best to give an example of one. One of the most topical ones is transformation of solid waste. Here you see a picture of one of our facilities at our institute where we're working with industry and government. We'll be able to deploy large-scale test rigs. It goes beyond what we do in the laboratory. One of the things of notes with this study is we found that 1,000 tonnes of solid waste has significant quantifiable reduction in CO2, energy use, water, and the use of landfill space. But it's not just simply about the management or giving space back to the community. and not impacting on future land use. It's about converting the material into usable products, a commodity that we can redeploy and reutilise within the national economy. The consequences of this research is significant, not only for community welfare and improving the quality of living, but also has an economic development. In Australia at the moment, on average, we're employing about 2.8 people for 10,000 tonnes of solid waste landfilled. What we hear is about a new industry about conversion and transformation of solid waste to products such as energy, strategical materials, and chemicals. These all add to the sustainability of a community and its long-term welfare. And what we're finding here is in these activities, we're employing up to 12 full-time employees for 10,000 tonnes of solid waste being processed. This translates to job opportunities and new value-added industry that can contribute to the gross domestic product. It's not just simply a problem that we're dealing with, but a solution that adds to sustainability economically, socially, and also with job creation. It's about developing advanced technologies that can significantly reduce the landfill costs and result in major revenue through these strategical materials and energy, which can form part of a new export market. Well, that concludes my discussion here today. It's really about creating a catalyst for discussion going forward into the panel. It's about trying to demonstrate the advantages of working in the public-private partnerships and how it can be a catalyst for innovation, and also taking up and taking risk in new technologies that can deliver these long-term benefits. I'd like to thank you for your time here today. I'd like to thank all the partners that we have here in the Pacific and in our different government organisations that we're involved with. Again, what if I can stress is that this collaborative engagement of working together on one large platform provides enduring solutions, and so which is also transferable to other countries and regions within the Pacific. So thank you.
Thanks, Alan. That was great. And it's great to see resources being put to positive use like that and creating jobs, which is what we're all about, I think. And the conversations we'll have later can explore some of that. And sorry, I spoke so quickly, I get very nervous. So I'll slow down for our next speakers. We've now got 3 speakers, and after that, we're going to have a roundtable, and Alan's going to stay around and join us. Our next speaker is Dr. Karen Rubenheimer, who's going to talk about a strong legislative framework and how that can incentivise innovation. Karen's a lecturer at the University of Wollongong and holds a PhD in international policy to prevent marine plastic pollution. She was lead author of the 2017 UNEP report assessing the effectiveness of relevant international and regional governance strategies presented at UNEA3. Karen co-developed the Regional Sea Strategic Directions Document 22 to 25 and authored the UNEP Guidelines for Marine Litter Action Plans. She's currently working with UNEP in developing global plastics indicators. She's also the lead author of the 2020 report commissioned by the Nordic Council of Ministers outlining the elements of new global plastics agreement. Welcome, Karen.
Thank you, Gail, and good day to everyone. It's a pleasure to be with you again today, and just to take a quick look at how a strong legislative framework can help incentivise innovation. And we'll also take a quick look at what types of innovation we could be targeting. So firstly, what do we want to achieve through policy? The direct outcomes would be to de-risk investment by the private sector by providing long-term legislative stability. We also want to stimulate waste avoidance and resource recovery, as we know. And we want policy to drive innovation, but that innovation must be within defined boundaries of sustainability. So we don't want any wild innovation that we can't deal with. But there are also some cross-cutting outcomes that we can be targeting through policy, such as the 3 planetary crises of climate change, biodiversity loss, and pollution, as well as reducing risks to human health and improving livelihoods, as we heard previously. So when we talk about innovation, it's not only products that we want designed to use less harmful materials that can be recycled more easily, or to use alternate materials, but we must also start thinking about stimulating innovation in services and infrastructure, such as the collection, sorting, storage, transport systems, amongst others. And examples here for transport include making use of the existing systems instead of adding a new layer through, for example, reverse logistics and backloading. We also need to be clear on what we want to achieve through innovation so that we can direct incentives effectively. Firstly, we want more reuse systems where products are used in their current form, and we need more than just charity shops to provide this service. We need systems that allow for repair and refurbish, and here we can also aim to support social enterprises. And then product stewardship and EPR schemes can help build systems for remanufacture and recycling. But these will all require innovation in products as well as services and infrastructure to support what you could call almost a reverse value chain. When we think about de-risking investment, we're looking to give the private sector confidence that they will get return on their investment. Policy design must break down the barriers to the introduction and uptake of new technologies. It must develop sustainable funding mechanisms that support the use of cleaner technologies in waste management. And very importantly, policy must stimulate the demand, but also the supply of recycled materials through developing effective end markets and increasing the quantity as well as the quality of the materials returned into the economy. And finally, these are all enabled by providing access to the public to the products and services that we want to encourage. At the forefront of policy objectives is achieving sustainable development. This means we need innovation to take place within certain environmental or risk boundaries. This can be achieved through defining standards and performance criteria, and competitive advantage can be given to products that are compliant through modulated fees and certification and labeling schemes, amongst others. And then we have some supporting measures such as landfill fees or bans and prohibitions on incineration of wastes. Finally, policy must incentivize participation by the private sector. Schemes can be designed as voluntary, co-regulatory, or mandatory, depending on the product. And those producers and products that fall outside the scope of a scheme must also be captured within policy to avoid resistance to the scheme. And then an important aspect for industry is the complexity and cost of compliance. Policy must reduce these barriers, including harmonizing the rules across jurisdictions and keeping it simple for businesses to comply with certification schemes, reporting, and transparency. So thank you. I hope that's given a little bit of a high-level starter to thinking about how policy can incentivize innovation. Thank you.
Thanks, Karen. That was great. I'm not sure I'm going to agree with you all on all those comments. So maybe you and I can have a conversation towards the end of the roundtable, just reminding everyone that later on, once the next two speakers are done, we want a roundtable and we need you to participate because it's your outcome statement that's going to be discussed. So we want to help you. So moving on to our next speaker, we're talking about with Mr. Chris Bleakley, Hub Leader at PPPs, a discussion on PPPs, public-private partnerships, and how they can be utilised to implement change. Chris is the Pacific Hub Leader for IFC's Public-Private Partnerships team based in Sydney. He leads the work to develop and implement PPPs across Papua New Guinea, the Pacific, and Timor-Leste. He joined IFC in 2010 and advised that in 2020, and prior to that, worked for the Australian government as an economic advisor based in Vanuatu and was with the World Bank in Sydney. Welcome, Chris.
Thank you very much, Gail, and hello to everyone. Thanks very much for welcoming me to the discussion today. So, yeah, I want to talk a little bit about public-private partnerships, the term we've used a lot in the session so far, and flag as an opportunity of the future. So, in IFC here, we are the transaction advisory arm of the World Bank. So we provide advice to governments on how to set up public-private partnerships. So I'll be drawing on that today. So a PPP, what is it? Usually we define it as some form of arrangement between the government and the private sector, where the private sector provides infrastructure, services, or some combination. And by arrangement, usually that means a contract of some form. And we see this mechanism used widely in infrastructure, in different sectors, also in services, increasingly in health. So there's a lot of experience now around how do we build these partnerships in a way that are effective and sustainable. Why would we do this? Well, you've heard from some of the previous speakers that a lot of the innovation in the market around waste management lies in the private sector, that expertise, that access to technology. So from a government side, how do we structure arrangements that let us benefit and access that expertise and technology? That's usually a key reason for considering a PPP. But also the private sector has the potential to bring investment, capital to the table, which can be useful for some governments where, capital's limited. There's always competing demands. So PPPs can be a way to bring that into the table. But also often a key reason cited around involving the private sector is the commercial discipline that often applies around things like asset maintenance, even basic management. Sometimes you see under these types of arrangements where commercial performance depends on good maintenance and good operations, that those things can be achieved at a higher level through the private sector. So if we think we're interested in structuring arrangements to involve the private sector in waste management, then what are the key things we need to be concerned about to make them work? Well, it all comes down to the contract that governs, or the agreement between the parties, and it's really critical that that's well structured and allocates the risks of the project appropriately to different parties. So usually we're looking to have the operational risk with the private sector because they're the ones who are delivering the services or providing the infrastructure. But there's some other risks that they're not so well equipped to manage. So part of the art of this is balancing those across the parties. Certainly, the starting point should really be the public sector having a clear idea of the outcomes that it wants. And then, part of the benefit of an arrangement like this is let's let the private sector think about what's the best way to get those outcomes. So rather than the public, the government trying to say exactly how everything gets done, it's maybe more effective to think, well, this is what we want to have accomplished, and let the innovation, the technology maybe dictate different ways that can be delivered through some sort of competitive process. So that's the option we most often encourage in considering how to structure PPPs. And of course, the bottom line for PPPs is the payment. The private sector seldom provides its services for free. So thinking about, well, in any PPP, how's the private sector going to get paid? Is it through charges they can directly levy to the community, or is the government going to pay, or is it some combination of that? And thinking through all these options really carefully is fundamental to having a successful PPP. If you cut the corners around that, you can end up with quite long-term problems. But if it's well thought through, well planned, then you can have partnerships that last 10 longer years where both parties get what they need out of the arrangement. And increasingly in the Pacific, just to close, we see a lot of projects now where we're combining the private and the public, and the public in the form of resources from development partners and others who can put money into the pot alongside private capital and expertise to make these projects work. So hopefully we can see a few more solutions that draw on this typology in the waste management field. Certainly in many other countries, they're well down the track in this, and we look forward to encouraging the debate and supporting however we can. Thanks, Gail.
Thanks, Chris. Well done. And one of the things that I want to achieve out of these two sessions is the word waste disappears. We're talking resources and material. So listen in, everyone. We're going to have this conversation because waste is linear. And if we keep thinking waste, we keep thinking linear. So let's see how we go at the roundtable after this next and final speaker of this session. Frederick Teeney, she's the manager of Echo Pavement from New Caledonia. Frederick is the manager of 3 recycling structures in New Caledonia. She's a Pacific national living and working in New Caledonia and has a healthy love and respect for the environment, which led her to focus her career in the environmental sector and to the management of innovative company like Echo Pavement, which is focused on providing solutions for plastic and glass. It says waste, but I'll say secondary material, and creating eco-design products that enhance the lives of Pacific Islanders. So welcome, Frederick.
Bonjour, merci beaucoup de m'avoir accueilli aujourd'hui. Donc, désolé, moi, je vais faire ma présentation en français. Du coup, on parle depuis tout à l'heure des partenaires privés-publics et en effet, Écopavement, on est un produit type. Écopavement est une start-up qui a été créée en 2018. Est-ce que c'est possible de changer la slide, s'il vous plaît? Merci. Donc, créé en 2018 par mon prédécesseur, du coup, parce que c'est un rachat. Ça a été accompagné par le territoire, donc l'ADEME Province Sud qui a tenu en fait à financer et à mener l'étude. En janvier cette année, du coup, j'ai racheté Écopavement pour le lancement, la relance en gros. Et actuellement, on est en pourparlers encore avec la Province Sud pour la phase industrielle du projet. Donc, vous pouvez changer la slide, s'il vous plaît. Alors, le procédé d'écopavement consiste à recycler un déchet qui est un gros problème dans la zone Pacifique, le plastique. Donc, nous, dans notre process, on inclut les déchets plastiques, le déchet du verre d'embouteillage et également le déchet de la scorie. On appelle ça le sland, qui est un déchet qui est créé par du coup la plus grosse usine du territoire qui fournit le nickel, enfin, qui transforme le nickel. Et dans notre process, qu'on appelle l'extrusion, on fait monter à très haute température ces déchets-là en suivant une recette type qui après subit un pressage, donc comme vous avez sur la petite explication, et pour en faire des produits éco-conçus pour la construction. Donc, si vous pouvez changer de slide, s'il vous plaît. Donc là, je vous ai mis des chantiers publics qui ont eu lieu sur le territoire, qui ont été faits avec nos produits. Donc actuellement, le produit phare d'Écopavement, c'est la dalle. La dalle comme une dalle béton, mais en beaucoup plus durable, parce qu'il faut savoir que le déchet, une fois transformé, peut être beaucoup plus costaud, enfin beaucoup plus durable et beaucoup plus tenace dans le temps. Donc là, c'est quelques photos de chantier qu'on a pu avoir sur la province sud du territoire. Si vous pouvez changer, s'il vous plaît. Écopavement a une évolution. Donc, comme je vous disais, en 2022 est prévue la phase industrielle. Donc, d'autres produits vont rentrer en compte. On va diversifier notre procédé, à savoir avec des produits beaucoup plus dans la décoration, comme les parements muraux. On va pouvoir faire des margelles pour les contours de piscine. On va pouvoir également faire tout ce qui concerne la voirie, des caniveaux. Donc, dans la construction de demain, on va pouvoir intégrer du déchet qui, de base, est un problème. On va pouvoir le transformer, en fait, pour le revaloriser et l'inclure dans notre construction. À savoir que c'est un procédé qui peut se faire partout dans le Pacifique. Donc, le process et les produits peuvent être exportés. Et ça va être notre but sur les années à venir. Et on est accompagné par l'ADEME Province Sud, qui est un partenariat du coup privé-public. Vous pouvez changer de slide, s'il vous plaît. Voilà. Donc, du coup, pour la phase industrielle, donc là, ce sera beaucoup plus ma partie, puisque la phase pilote a été financée à l'époque de l'ancien gérant. Donc, pour la phase industrielle, on va être soutenu à hauteur de 25% par le territoire et avec des budgets qui seront dispatchés de façon à pouvoir donner un coup de main pour la communication, le marketing et surtout pour le financement des machines. À savoir que nos produits sont innovants, donc peu connus du public, donc on a tout à faire, mais c'est une idée et des produits qui sont très soutenus par le territoire. Donc nous, ça nous permet aussi de pouvoir imaginer plus de solutions en lien avec le déchet plastique, qui est un gros souci sur notre territoire.
Thank you, Frederick. That was brilliant. It's fantastic to see how material has actually turned into something very useful, right, in the Pacific Islands. So that it's a brilliant case study. You'd be pleased to know in Australia we have exactly the same issue. and we're doing glass into road, into tiles, into pavers. Yeah. So can I bring everybody back up for a round table? And this is where all participants should be joining in and asking questions of this fantastic panel that has been brought together from around the world, dare I say. Australia's part of the world, to start having a conversation about how we can use innovation and public-private partnerships to help people capture questions and learnings for tomorrow's outcome statement. So I might start with just a general question, because I guess I'm struggling with, keep talking waste, right? And we're not talking material. And whilst we talked innovation, we haven't talked design. So how do we start to change the design of what comes in to be able to start talking circular to make a change? Because it's designing out materials and designing out pollution is as much of a challenge in the Pacific Islands as it is anywhere else. So, you know, would that help? And how could you go about that in the Pacific to make change? Or is that too difficult an opener? Okay, that didn't work.
I might add something high level here. I think for me, if you're designing a product correctly, then you won't have waste. If you're not designing it properly, you will have waste, and then you have different options for that product, and that's probably going to be something like incineration or landfill. But we are working at the international level at trying to, and at the regional level, trying to work out some sustainability criteria for products. I think Chris mentioned, you know, you want to talk about the outcomes, but leave it free for innovation so long as they're delivering on the outcomes that you want. So if you are defining what those products should be and how they should perform, you then open up those options for restricting access onto the market if they don't meet those criteria. And I think that's a starting point, particularly in the Pacific, where they're very reliant on imports of products and not so much on the manufacturing. So they can't influence the design of local manufacturers necessarily, but they can influence what's being imported. But again, that takes a lot of research too, because products are used in many different ways, and we need to understand those social aspects before we start limiting products on the market. Thanks.
And just a question that's been posed from the panel, you know, is there any attempts, and I know in Australia we're struggling with importation and products that's coming in, but is there any attempt by government to reduce some of these problematic materials coming to market so that you're not dealing with it at end of pipe to solve? So is that, or could that be something that governments could consider, looking at what comes onto the market at first instance, or what governments buy, so that it could actually change the material that we have to solve? Because it's out there. Alan, what do you think? Do you think that would be a positive step forward?
Yeah, well, governments have a big say on the on consumption within the market itself, because they're big organisations in their own right. So by specification of they set the standard in many ways for products that have been brought into the country, and it's not just simply about elimination of product that becomes waste. It's about writing specifications of materials that can be easily recovered as well. Some of the biggest focus, we've got a big problem at the moment with some solar technologies. Now we're looking at research on recoverable products that, you know, more based on organic materials, that's been smart up front. And the Pacific Islands have the problem is, if we do get recovery, we've got to be able to put it back into the production schedule. So example, it's easy to take copper out of a house, but it's a different thing to process it and put it back into an adequate supply chain to be able to use as a viable product. So there's a lot of logistics that can be set up, but certainly we don't want to have dead-end problems in remote communities, because where do you take it to? It costs more money to transport it back to a central processing point. And that's where I was discussing about secondary mining. I see us not mining copper from the ground, because, you know, we've probably got about 20 years of viable product available in the world with the known resources, as opposed to we'll be mining those old garbage dumps and pulling that copper out. But it's not ferrous, it's non-ferrous, so it gives a whole heap of technical problems that we have to solve.
That's a fantastic segue, Alan, into the first question from the floor. How do we actually ensure that the money generated from the waste collection and landfill fees for waste management that are paid to government don't get used elsewhere and come back into this industry? This money should actually be going towards innovation for improvements for solid waste management. So how, maybe Karen and Alan, you possibly looked at this as part of your research. How do we get levy monies back into the system to deal with to assist with innovation?
Well, that becomes part of the private partnership, is that there's incentive to recover the material and turn it into financial returns so they can get their payments from that recovery process. In terms of levies, yes, it is quite significant at the moment, and that's just it's like a carbon tax. We're putting in carbon to stop us using more, to make it more expensive to deliver our waste. However, I knew growing up as a boy that we used to go around and get lead acid batteries and collect them and take them down and get our money from the recycler, or we would take our copper down. You don't see that anymore. So it's a cultural shift. And the other thing to note is that it is a generational problem, and it's just a recent generation. I can still remember we didn't have plastics when I was growing up. So,
oh, come on, you're not that old.
I am. Okay, I can still remember the Clydesdale bringing the bread cart down the street, and I used to ride the Clydesdale down into the street. So all the food came to us. So I still think that a financial value to that recovery of material is one of the biggest challenges, and the other one is social, in terms of how do we go back to the future to a more sustainable model.
Sorry, I was just reading the questions. I completely agree. Consumption is a real challenge, right? And how do we go back to seeing that products have value, right? Because at the moment, it's just too easy to discard, I guess. Frederick, how do you fund what you do as a company, and taking what is a material, a secondary raw material, I would say, not waste, and turning it into a product? How do you make your business work financially?
Alors, pour le moment, excusez-moi, ça résonne. Alors, pour le moment, j'ai pas de... La phase pilote ne permet pas d'être rentable pour le moment, puisque ça a été vraiment une phase test qui a permis de produire un matériau en sortie qui permettait d'être sûr que ce soit jouable et viable sur le long terme. Donc, c'est pour ça aussi que je passe en phase industrielle l'année prochaine. Mais c'est vrai que le fait que, en tout cas en Calédonie, les gens aient envie de changer leur façon de consommer, aient envie d'utiliser des produits éco-conçus et de l'intégrer dans les constructions du territoire, ça nous permet aussi de pouvoir écouler nos stocks, écouler nos productions et faire connaître aussi sur l'ensemble du territoire les produits éco-conçus. Parce que c'est vrai que les gens partent souvent du principe que les produits issus du recyclage ne sont pas forcément durables et ne sont pas forcément de bonne qualité. Et c'est tout le combat qu'on essaye de mener, nous, ici, en montrant qu'on peut consommer du recyclé de bonne qualité et sur du long terme, en ayant moins de problèmes que si on prend des matériaux, des matières premières, quoi. Donc, ça a été par un cheminement social. Le financement, la rentabilité va venir avec la phase industrielle et avec le fait qu'on va diversifier nos produits aussi.
And what plastics do you use, Frederick?
Alors, on utilise les plastiques opaques, donc le PEHD, le PEBD, le PP. Donc, tout ce qui va être pour quelqu'un de lambda, des bouchons de bouteilles. Vous avez des bidons qu'on utilise en usine. Vous avez tout ce qui est film de palettisation. Vous avez également tout ce qui est flacons de lessive, shampoing, donc des produits qui sont utilisés dans la vie quotidienne. Et ben, ces plastiques-là vont rentrer dans nos procédés avec le verre d'embouteillage, justement, et va permettre en fait de réduire les déchets à la source, et aussi de faire en sorte que les gens changent leur façon de consommer.
Excellent. So Chris, a company such as Fredericks and how she said she's in the trial and the startup phase, how could IFC help a company like that or someone else who's thinking about embarking on this journey? How would you go about and what would IFC do to assist?
Well, for a company like yours, Frederic, I mean, there's two parts of IFC that can work with you. There's we actually have a commercial investment side that's always looking for companies with good business models who are working in really in the developing countries of the Pacific. So that's one avenue, you can explore. But my part of IFC is more working with government to try and work out, well, what are the arrangements the government can put in place to really encourage this new technology, better schemes for resource management, et cetera. And I come back to that. There was that question earlier about the fees, how to ensure that's properly directed and really that thinking about the financial structure of the whole space is really so important because unless this is clearly described, you have that sort of opaqueness about what money's been collected and where it's going, that's not really to anyone's benefit. I think, having a really clear sense of the financing structure around resource management, what are the fees that have been generating, who's paying them, where do they go? Are we expecting Treasury to support this or is this going to be self-sustaining? You have to ask these questions, otherwise, we're not going to really take it forward in a way that encourages that, that innovation that everyone's looking for.
And what are the three key elements that IFC like to see in government structures that make the decision to help IFC decide to invest, Chris?
Well, these governments are our members, so we're always responding to requests. But the first thing I would look at is there political support? Is there will to do this from someone? Because these types of projects always get messy, and unless there's someone who's really going to champion it, more times than not, it'll founder at some point in the state. So that's important. That's critical. And secondly, it's kind of the other parts of the partnership that are really important. Trying to help the government think through what are the outcomes we want here. So you've got to be clear about that. If you're not clear about the outcomes, you can't write a contract for it, right? It's impossible. And thirdly, that payment issue. How are we planning to pay for these services? Are we going to pass it fully on to the public, or is the government still going to have a role, or is there some combination in the middle there? Because at the end of the day, the private sector, they want to be certain they're going to get paid. If they're investing, if Frederic's company is going to invest, some large amount of money in a facility, they want to be sure that they're going to be able to recover that. So we have to think really carefully about that. They're the three key things that any PPP project needs to think about.
Comment from Paul Mooney from Vanuatu in the chat that I completely agree with about the challenges of the Pacific Islander countries managing the imports and exports. That's why we need, I guess, greater compliance and knowledge about the work that Ellen MacArthur Foundation did in relation to plastics in the ocean and, being able to demand as PIC countries that they get the same quality of imports and plastic coming to the countries as anywhere else in the world. So it's really, really important, I think, for those conversations for countries to get on board and require the same standards as any other country does. Alan, Karen, advice to companies setting out and how to talk to government about opportunities that exist in our sector to create these local jobs and opportunities. What learnings or what advice would you give, to identify material streams, to look at how we can make these commercial or at least scale up? How would you go about that in talking to government that these are opportunities?
Well, the process that the part of the funding we leverage through a research institute is actually to secure funding from the government to probably de-risk that initial phase. The second one is the need to get pilot scale, and that's where we've worked with the New South Wales and federal government to actually have workshops on the precinct so that we can actually put the 1/5 scale of the product in the workshops to do the proof of concept. And it comes back to what I was probably summarising what we just said, is that how do we determine the value, what was seen as waste but is actually a resource, because that's what incentivises the investment. And the second one is then how do we have that socially and economically viable in the application within the regions to be deployed, which is the logistical issues plus changing the consumer behaviour in terms of that product. I mean, if you see value, people want to give it to you to get financial return, and then it can be returned in the actual the product being achieved. Example we're looking at is a big focus on solid waste recovery, even to breaking it down to organic chemicals we can derive from the waste, to even reconstructing vitamins from the materials in remote locations. So it's total much recovery. And their justification is simple, is the cost to get materials that with them, especially with the disruption with COVID and the geopolitical issues that we're now facing. And the secondary one is that how do you interface with not just simply being private, but being public in terms of it is a public substitution of a public service, which is what we see as waste recovery. So
how am I going to get material into your head, Alan, and not waste?
Well, what I'm saying is that, I see it as resource. That's what I was saying before. I see a circular economy in resources, but where we like it or not, there's an expectation someone's going to pick up my waste out in front of my house, and I pay for people to do that at the moment.
Yeah,
so
but,
there is a public cost to it.
Household is only 27% of the stream. It's much bigger, right? So it's much bigger waste stream out there than just what comes out of a house. So we need to shift the conversation along to material.
Yeah, and that's true. But don't forget, a lot of our manufacturing is back into that consumer market. So it's a behaviour that is carried right through. But there is an overlap between a public service and a financial return, and that's how do we overlap that. Now, we're seeing collaborations between local governments and with state and federal. We're seeing more and more an equal partnership, and we're seeing these co-located resource recovery facilities where there's the public service as well as the financial gain through recovery of those resources.
All right, I have to wrap it up. That was a great conversation, and but I've got to say, those of you listening in need to start doing more work. We can't do it all. So the next session, I expect more questions. Thank you so much, Chris, Karen, Alan, Frederic. I think we had a great group here who we talked about evidence-based policy development, right through to financing, right through to the reality on the ground. So well done, team. I hope that those listening in got a lot from it. I am told that we have a 5-minute break before we move into our next session, which I hope you will find useful. So I believe that you hang around, and we start again in 5 minutes with our next group of speakers. So thank you very much.